mentoring and discipleship ministry, you may be in the 3-hour course or the 6-hour course, but my colleagues have agreed to come together to discuss several areas. We hope that you have lively conversation as well with your mentor as you try to figure out a way to create disciples in the local church for spiritual maturity. We hope that you may have taken discipleship strategies or lifespan discipleship, but you may not be a Christian education focused student, and so this may be the only discipleship course and you're taking it as an elective. Whatever brings you to the table for this course, we hope that this helps you as you try to figure out that culture of discipleship in the local church. You know, it wasn't too many years ago that each church in our Baptist world kind of looked like one another and how we did Sunday morning and how we did discipleship and kind of the metrics for, are we doing anything effective? Today, every church is even more autonomous in that it doesn't clearly translate from one church to the other. So what we're talking about today is trying to stay at the 20,000 feet view for you as you try to figure it out in your specific context. There's nothing absolute here. You might even see your professors disagree a little bit on some of these issues. But we hope it's beneficial for you and your ministry and hopefully create good conversation with you and your mentor as you meet weekly to figure out discipleship in the local church. To get us started, Dr. Stewart's going to kind of lead out. And as you know, in the syllabus, it says that you're to meet with your mentor each week for 1 hour. And then you're to submit a weekly report the Monday following that mentor meeting. Well, the first third of that in the course documents, there's a template for that weekly report. And it says, how are you doing in your personal spiritual disciplines and formation? And how are you discussing that with your mentor? Dr. Stewart, in ministry, what really helps us to continue to develop as a disciple and just not lead disciples? What do we do to continually be formed spiritually? And I know some of my colleagues will weigh in as well.
Well, I think for all people, not just ministers, but I think there's three things specifically that we can choose to be involved in to help us grow spiritually. And then there's one that we can't choose. So let me mention those to you, and then I'm sure we can probably discuss them. But the first one is basically spiritual disciplines. We choose to do that. We choose to read the Bible. We choose to pray. We choose to share our faith. We choose to learn just the basic spiritual disciplines. The second one is to allow ourselves to be accountable and transparent in relationships. And so we don't become isolated. We don't become lone rangers, but we become open to act in a community of believers. The third one is to engage in ministry. We actually learn through experiential learning. So doing serving in the church, whether it's in preschool ministry, if it's teaching an adult class, small group class, even if it's going on a mission trip outside the church, we can also grow spiritually. Spiritual formation happens that way. So those are the three main ways that I share that we all can grow, and we choose to do those things. Now, the one way that we can't choose is that's when God works through grief and suffering and despair, and we don't choose that often. That often comes to us, and we can choose to grow through that or not. But God's the one that allows that to happen. So.
Wow,
absolutely.
Colleagues, what are some things over the years in ministry and serving on staff? We've all served on staff in local churches and still are actively involved in local church ministry. What can we do to be sure the disciplines are fresh each day and are practiced even in our church office environment?
Well, I know for me, one of the things I've had to intentionally make a part of my own daily reading is that I want to make sure that my quiet time or my personal Bible study time is a different section of the Bible, different than the curriculum or the teaching schedule that I am, because I might have a tendency in my own times with the Lord to think, wow, this would make a great study, or boy, my people really need this.
Right.
But God wants to speak to me. He wants to move in my own life, and so I want to make sure that I'm not just looking at it as prep time for a sermon or preparation for a Bible study that I'm leading, but that it's my own spiritual growth. So that's
Dr. Odom, that's where I had to. The biggest challenge for me is to be sure I don't try to have my quiet time at the office or those kind of things, because if I primarily practice my spiritual disciplines at the office, it becomes ministry planning and ministry execution, and so I really had to redevelop where I actually do those at home, and the office is a continuation of those, because I used to go in early and just have my quiet time at the office, especially when we had a baby that would cry and those kind of things. But it became, I couldn't make it where it was just about me and being alone with the Lord. It became more about, hey, how can I teach this? Or
Right.
how can I develop that? Or,
Right.
I'd have two thoughts on that. One is I used to feel a lot of guilt that I would listen to people about getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning and having these quiet times.
You don't?
And my personal body clock, I have 2 days. I have 6:30 to 2 o'clock in the day, and then I have a 2 to midnight day.
Uh-huh.
And I
can
function
affirm
almost
that.
better in the 2 to midnight day than I do in the morning. So it took me a long time to not feel the guilt that it's okay if I do my quiet. I mean, I certainly start the day with prayer and thanking God for the day and dedicating that day to Him. But any serious, real personal time is much better for me in the evenings, just because that's when I function. It's usually quieter for me and that sort of thing.
So there's no magical hour.
There's no magical hour, and I think all of us have to find when that fits. And our seasons of ministry might change that. There may be things that are going on in your family life or your church life that you've got to moderate to that along with your own personal style.
Yeah.
The other thing I would say that I would affirm this is that real ministry, effective ministry, grows out of that our overflow of what we're doing and learning in our own Christ likeness into other people. So it's imperative. Otherwise, we can very easily drift into a flesh-driven ministry, and which can be busy but not necessarily always effective. And so we've got to make sure that we keep that freshness in our walk with Christ.
One of the things that was most effective when I was on church staff was the gathering together outside of church hours, but with people that were church related. Some were staff, and of course, as a female on staff, most of the staff were men, and so I grouped together with women who were my age. Some were older, some were younger, for prayer time, for accountability, for those relationships to develop. And it's a good practice whether you're male or female. But I want just a word of caution there as well. When you're in an intimate prayer group and you spend a lot of time sharing emotional things, and we want to reach out and care for one another, that can be a little slippery place. And so we always want to have proper accountability with that. But for me, that group of women with whom I prayed regularly really helped me in my staff life, and in my leadership, but also in my personal life as well.
I would also like to piggyback on one thing Dr. Stewart said, and that's this accountability factor. It's almost a natural that we're getting accountability from people that are our superiors or our authorities. But a challenging thing, but I think it's been beneficial for me, is to invite my subordinates to say, you're watching me, and I give you permission to speak into my life if you see things where we all have blind spots. And if that can be threatening sometimes, but if we build the right trust level, and I think we can invite those who are under our charge to speak into our lives. That helps us to keep those elements clean and pure that we need to have.
I want to mention an alternative that I've utilized a few times in recent years, and because I'd always heard basically what you've shared, Dr. Dean, and what you've shared, Dr. Odom, about, okay, your spiritual formation time and your Bible study time, it needs to be separate than what you're studying and what you're preparing to teach.
So it's not academic.
Yeah, so it's not academic. You don't want it to be that. But what I found out is that when I integrate that, actually, what I'm studying and I'm preparing to share into my own personal life, it actually becomes life-changing for me. And so I've actually grown
As we hope it is for the students.
Yeah, so I've actually grown some because of that. And, because I've always heard that same thing. Okay, you need to make sure you're separating your own quiet time from what you're doing, what you're planning, and all that. But I've tried that, but it almost becomes a time management issue.
It can be. Where are you going to have time to do all
where am I
that?
going to have time to do this? And so, and you always, in teaching prep and in sermon prep, you always want to have illustrations, and you want it to flow from the heart. And so,
Sure.
so hey, let's try to apply it to our own lives.
I think then really probably a good word to anyone is try and see what works with you.
Right.
You know, just
Yeah.
try it and see how it works. And if you find that you're distracted by that it's not feeding you, you're not growing through it, then try another approach, which was a very wise word of advice my grandmother gave me years ago. Make a decision, and then if you find it's not the decision that it's not playing out like you like, make another decision. You're never really stuck. And so I think, you know, with our spiritual formation, we attempt something and then we find out, you know, maybe this is a little beyond me. I need to take a different approach. I need to take different steps. And so as long as we're in process, you know, I think that's the thing that we need to constantly be in process and make those decisions. It's like you said, Dr. Stewart, it's a decision. We decide to read our Bible. We decide to be in relationships with people. We decide to go to worship. And it's a series of decisions, and they all have consequences, our decisions, both positive and sometimes not so positive consequences. But we grow even in those times when we've made a decision and we are paying the price for it.
Because these things are so tightly connected, our personal life, our vocation, our ministry, sometimes it's hard to separate those things. But and that's where sometimes it's important for us to withdraw from all of those venues, get some quiet time, do personal retreat,
Yeah,
and
that's
get
right.
perspective and get those things, find a rebalance of those and how they fit so that we're not neglecting any of those three areas.
Colleagues, we hope that as you meet with your mentor that you're finding that balance of your own spiritual formation, that you're finding time just not to give yourself to others in ministry, but to also be refreshed personally. It looks different for all of us. Each of us on faculty here are at different stages of our life. Kids are at different ages, and where we're at in life is different places. And so we hope this just helps you start to assimilate and synthesize spiritual formation in your ministry. Your mentor is going to have years of experience to pour into you as well as what's worked for them. So we hope that as you meet each week, you're talking about your own spiritual formation and finding some best practices for you in this season of life as you also reach and make disciples.